The response, the member from London West.
Thank you, Speaker. On behalf of my colleagues in the NDP caucus and NDP leader Andrea Horwath, I rise today as Women's Issues critic to respond to the minister's statement on Equal Pay Day. Speaker, Ontarians who haven't heard of Equal Pay Day before could be forgiven for thinking that celebration is in order, for believing that April 19th must somehow mark the day that equal pay for men and women in this province has finally been achieved. Unfortunately, Speaker, nothing could be further from the truth. Instead, Equal Pay Day tells us, on average, how far into the next year a woman has to work in order to earn the same salary a man earned the year before. In other words, it takes almost 16 months for a woman to earn what men earned in 12, to get out of the red, so to speak, as signified by my red scarf today. For immigrant women, Indigenous women, and women with disabilities, Equal Pay Day comes much, much later, closer to the summer than to the spring. For all of us, women and men, the day reminds us of how far we still have to go to close the gender wage gap, and unfortunately, how little we have accomplished, not only since 2013, when the day was first observed in Ontario, but over the decades since the gap was first quantified. While Equal Pay Day is common in jurisdictions around the world, it is because of the advocacy of the Equal Pay Coalition, and in particular the efforts of my NDP colleague, the member for Parkdale High Park, that we now recognize Equal Pay Day in Ontario. It provides an important means of raising awareness of the reality that women in this province continue to earn about 30% less than men. And as we learned yesterday in a new report from the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, the gap may be narrower or wider, but it exists across all occupations, all industries, regardless of age, income, or level of education, whether in the public sector or the private sector. Speaker, New Democrats welcome the tabling of the Gender Wage Gap Steering Committee consultation summary today. Certainly, Ontario women have been waiting a very long time for government leadership to close the earnings gap, since the late 1980s, when pay equity was hailed as the cornerstone of government gender wage gap strategies. As we have learned since then, however, equal pay legislation alone will not close the gap, especially when it is not enforced and especially when it is not adequately funded. These issues were raised frequently during the government's Closing the Gender Wage Gap consultations, as noted in the summary report posted today. The report observes, some people said that the laws are not well enforced, are complex and difficult to access. Many suggested that the laws should be monitored and implemented in a proactive manner by government, instead of relying on an individual's complaint before an investigation is started. It also states, we heard that there is a need for effective enforcement, proactive monitoring for compliance, support for those making complaints, especially for non-unionized workers, and amendments to the proxy provisions of pay equity. Another theme that was highlighted in the summary report is the recognition of childcare as an essential strategy to eliminate the gap. The report states that childcare was the #1 issue everywhere. It concludes, almost everyone mentioned the need to provide high-quality, affordable and accessible childcare as a priority issue to help working women and their families close the gender wage gap. Consultation participants strongly supported a public system of early childhood education and care that is universal, high-quality and comprehensive, and for public funding to ensure both adequate wages and affordable fees. Yet the 2016 Ontario budget includes no new money for childcare funding, no new investments to help reduce fees, despite the fact that for the second year in a row, Ontario reported the highest and least affordable childcare fees in Canada, with long waiting lists for subsidies in many communities. A recent report on fees across Canada found that the 7 most expensive cities for childcare are all in Ontario. This calls into question, Speaker, whether a gender lens was actually actually applied in the development of the 2016 budget, and it also raises concerns about how the minister responsible for women's issues is implementing that aspect of her mandate. I want to conclude, Speaker, with another issue that it came up during the consultation, and that was the need to support women experiencing violence to maintain their employment. This can be done through initiatives like my private member's bill 177 to provide up to 10 days of paid leave for domestic violence or sexual violence. I hope that this will provide a catalyst for the government to move forward with my bill. Thank you, Speaker.